We will also post it to our YouTube channel, which we'll share the link to as well. If you haven't already, if you could list your information in the chat, your name, job title, organization, just so we can get to know who's here. And also, if you haven't answered the poll, we'll leave that up for a couple of minutes. Also, if you have any questions at any time during the session, just please use the chat. We'll get to them before the end. And the contact information for all of our panelists, we'll also share that at the end, so that if you have any follow-up questions after this session, you'll be able to reach out to them directly. Okay, so if you're not familiar with CareerScope, it's an assessment that measures a person's their individual interests and aptitudes, so that we can recommend careers or training programs where they have the most potential for success. So we're offering this webinar series because you may have heard us say your mission is our mission. So we're committed to helping our partners not only meet their missions, but also improve the lives of the people that they serve. And regarding the people that they serve, we're committed to those people, also those people that are in transition. We want to make sure that we can identify the best fit careers and opportunities for them as well as they go down their path. And we need to listen and learn from our partners so that we could continually adapt and develop products that can make an impact on their end users. So that being said, every year, 200,000 service members leave the US military and they make the transition to civilian life. However, only 1 in 4 of those US veterans have a job already lined up when they leave the service. So today, the point of today's conversation is just to hear more about the power and the impact of hiring veterans and including them in the existing workforce, best practices for employers to recruit and hire and train and retain these veterans, and then how veterans themselves can empower themselves while they're on the job search and hiring process. So joining us today are Brian, Amel, Lisa Barber, and Irene Perez. And I'm going to ask them to get us started by just introducing themselves and telling us a little bit about the work that they do.
Sure, I can lead off, and thank you, Krista.
Sure.
My name is Ryan Amel, and I am with my company is called Ride Technologies. We're a government contractor focused in staffing and recruiting. I'm here today because we're also part of a program in Virginia called Virginia Values Veterans, or V3 program. We are very passionately and in support of the cause of helping and hiring veterans in the state of Virginia and elsewhere. And I'm very honored and humbled to be here alongside the other panelists today. Thank you, Krista.
Thank you. Irene, do you want to go next? Or Lisa, either one.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Irene Perez and I am the business outreach specialist for New Jersey vocational rehabilitation. I work with the state, and our mission there is to assist individuals with disabilities to obtain and maintain employment. We offer several services for an individual that is disabled, and it is we also assist the veterans. One of the services that we often service the veterans is job placement. As we probably most of us know, the veterans do have their own federal vocational rehab, but one thing that that they may not do so often is also apply for the state vocational rehab so that they can obtain more services. And we provide a lot of the same services, but one of the things that the state does is we do schedule a hiring events, and recruitment, positive recruitments, which we definitely reach out to our veterans to participate in. So that's one of what my agency does. We've been in business over 100 years, and we continue to support our veterans. We reach out to the disabled veterans and work with the local disabled veterans representative here and assist their clients, and we definitely collaborate with them. Thank you.
Thanks, Irene. And now we have Lisa. Hi,
Hey,
Lisa.
everybody. Thank you so much, Irene and Ryan, and thank you to everyone who's joined us today. My name is Lisa Barber. I served on active duty in the U.S. Air Force for 11 years. I was injured in combat in Afghanistan in 2011. So I am a service-related medically retired veteran who then did exactly what Krista was saying. I wasn't expecting to leave the military. I left without a plan. I was one of those veterans. And since 2015, I have been working in the professional services industry. So for the big consulting firms around the DC area, and very successfully. And I would love to share some of those lessons learned and what that transition has looked like for me with all of you on the call today. So thank you so much for having me.
And Lisa and everyone else who's on the call who may be a veteran, I should say thank you for your service. I should have mentioned that sooner, but thank you so much for that. So maybe we can start there. How and when do transitioning veterans typically begin to develop a employment plan if they're leaving a plan with a planned transition?
So
for any of you who could, any of you.
So I can talk to what we talk about in the military is that we are always trying to do between a 12 and 18 month plan. That's what we tell all of the troops that work for us. That's what I told all of my staff the whole time that I was working in the military. Always have a backup plan. But then life happens. I wasn't planning to go to Afghanistan and be as critically injured as I was. I wasn't planning to leave the military. That was not a choice that I had even considered at the time. And so I think that then there's that element as well of just like things happen, just like we've seen in the tech industry in the past couple of weeks with the mass layoffs. Similar things happen in the military where we do reductions, where people get injured, where life changes. And these folks are highly trained and highly skilled coming out of the military and don't have a plan and are looking to people like Irene and Ryan and those of you on the call here to help them figure out how to transition those skills and the aptitude and kind of their interests into fields that are not military related.
And I don't know if Irene or Ryan have anything to add to that as far as when even you, Irene, with the disabled veterans, do they come to you? Are you only working with disabled veterans, or do you also work? You are muted, Irene.
Irene,
you're still muted.
Sorry, I forget that. Okay. At GVR, we work with all clients that have a disability. The vet will have to be, honorably discharged to apply for our services. Or, if they're not honorably discharged, but still have a disability, they can come to GVR and we can, help them with obtaining an occupation that they can do with their functional limitations. So it's pretty just simple process.
Okay.
I would just echo what Lisa said there with the 12 to 18 months. Usually when we're talking to veterans, it's in that actually into the 6 to 12 month range, but mostly of the time their plan itself is beginning to formulate, or at least the direction and guidance they're given is 12 to 18 months. So that's very consistent with what we hear. I also think though that for those veterans out there that have not gotten to their plan and they're at 6 months left, it's not a time to panic by any means. There's still plenty of time for you to find work that aligns with what you're looking for. So, but yes, Lisa is correct, and Lisa's going to be correct on this panel for most of the day today. So, so that's what we're expecting. But yes, agreed. So,
Lisa, you and Ryan, you're meeting with. Are you meeting with these vets in that 12 to 18 month time period, or not until they've actually left service?
I think it depends. And I think that that's really an interesting question, Krista, because I think one of the things that's really special about the veteran community and something that I think that people on this call and outside of this call should take advantage of is that it's so much like a family because we've been through so much together, that these combat experiences and deployments and like being through lots of exercises that we do, we become very close and become some of each other's best friends in the world, but also professional advocates. And so once you've hired one veteran and kind of opened that door, I'm going to tell you the names of all of my friends who are looking for jobs, who are really amazing at what they do. And that's kind of how it snowballs. And so to answer Ryan's question, what tends to happen with me is that people in my network, either through LinkedIn or through just other friendship circles. And again, I left in 2013. So this was almost 10 years ago. And this is still happening several times a week where someone will reach out and say like, yeah, they're like aroundish that window, maybe 6 to 12 months, or maybe like life has happened and they're already looking for a job and they're kind of just not sure where to start. And it's talking through like, what were your favorite things that you did in the military? Let's think about like, what kind of industries do you know that are outside? And for a lot of us, like I'm a third generation military person. I knew nothing. I know like how to put on a uniform, how to pull my hair back and how to like go to work. And so that has been a really big transition for me. And I'm not alone in that. That's a really big transition for lots and lots of people who've been doing this since they were 18.
Yeah, just following on with Lisa, I would say our contact with veterans for the most part is when it's early, it's usually, sometimes it's after they've transitioned, but if it is prior to transition, it's usually right around the 6-month mark is when we're beginning to find them and get in contact with them. Certainly they'll find us a little bit earlier than that sometimes, but when we're seeing them more active on the market is usually around the 6-month mark. And that timing works out for most in our space in government contracting. We're able to utilize them even earlier than that because there's a lot of proposal work and a lot of time between when a bid goes out and when the work actually begins. So sometimes we see them before 6 months, but usually that's the earliest out is about 6 months and then all the way up until the transition.
Gotcha. Thank you. So going off of that, so that whole veteran network that you talked about, how you're all sort of a team and work together as a team and you help each other out. So if an employer hasn't hired veterans before and they're specifically trying to do that now, what would you say would be an important first step for employers, given that once they tap into this veteran network, it could yield benefits,
For sure.
forever. So
Yeah.
what would be the first step that you would give advice to an employer that wants to turn to veterans?
I think that's a really great question because I think that there's also a myth of that what we do in the military is not transferable to like civilian life. And Jen was one of my career coaches when I was going through an MBA at Georgetown, and she watched my frustration over and over and over while me 11 years of professional HR experience and companies just kept saying like, yeah, military HR, but you don't know what we do. And so I think that that's the first part, but the real, I think that when I talk to our recruiters at my current company, the advice was to really understand what military specialties are transferable to your unique business. So sometimes the obvious answers are the technology type things, because we have lots of people in the military who work in the IT space, who manage computer systems, who manage the platforms like Salesforce type platforms that we use every day on active duty. So there's some of that, but then there's also this second layer of just professional skills. And I think that that's part of why many veterans end up in a consulting, banking, those types of industries that are service-oriented industries, hotels. Lots of veterans end up in kind of those spaces because it's being reliable, showing up to work on time, treating customers appropriately in a way that we find professional. Those type, the dedication to learning new skills, those are all things that are reinforced over and over. So really understanding where your business, whatever your business is, intersects with either core technical skills that we have in the military or core values that we have in the military is a super important first step. And I see that Jen wrote some of those in the chat. That's really helpful.
Thanks, Lisa. Irene or Ryan, is there anything that you can add to that? Or even Irene, I know that you reach out to employers to build those relationships. Is there anything that you would recommend or what they need to do when they think about hiring veterans if they haven't already?
I try to, when I do a presentation to an employer, I definitely bring out the tax incentives, services that we provide that can help them with training, such as an on-the-job training where we pay 50% of the wages. I try to encourage them probably an apprenticeship where it's 100% paid and they can get a grant. I provide these services that can assist the employer with and motivate them to hire them, and probably do dispel the myths to them through a disability etiquette presentation to them, and they kind of like more open, and there's like, wow, and also providing talent. Just it probably just starts, like Lisa I think said, just with one. And once you get that one, it's just like it flows, because I had this good one. Let me go back to that content and get more, and then you get more and more, and then it's not what you thought. It's actually better. So it's more dispelling those myths and trying it out, for sure.
So I started to try to get that myth conversation going in the chat. So are there specific ones? Are there ones that you hear all the time that you try to dispel when you do these employer presentations, or even when Lisa or Ryan, when you're working with companies that want to hire veterans, but they're not sure? I mean, one that I hear is, that skills are not transferable, that military skills are not, civilian work skills, which we've just talked a little bit about, but are there other ones that come up commonly?
I think when you're talking about the transferable skills, we do that a lot, and definitely we use the CareerScope for that, because it has the military titles and it transfers. It gives you others. That's a good way to use the vocational test. Through let's say they had this. They were military, and then we're trying to look them a civilian with their disability. In our case, and Lisa's probably different, but what with a disability, what other occupations would they be able to do, with that? And that's a great way of getting that information through a vocational test like a CareerScope.
Yeah, and just going back, we were talking about what can companies do to target veterans or to hire veterans to start. And I think one of the things, and then I'll address the second question there, Krista, I think just some simple things to start, right? So I think making your job postings veteran friendly. This seems like a kind of a not important one, but it is. I think veterans are going to be active on the job market. They're looking for a position. And I think what you're talking about is very simply, and what do I mean by this? I mean, simply having a line on your job posting and say, we hire veterans and military family members. Very simple, straightforward, but a veteran sees that and is going to feel welcome, or at least we're hoping they do, as the idea. And I think programs like the ones that we're going to mention here, some of the ones that we're going to mention here today, B3 being one of them for us, the idea is spreading awareness about hiring veterans and making it something that we're all in on. Opens up so many more opportunities for these veterans. So it's really, the first big step is really awareness and taking a proactive step to be inviting to those people in particular. And then the other thing I'll mention, and we certainly won't hijack our presentation here, but the other thing that's helpful is engaging a staffing partner in your industry to help you with this. And that's what my company does in the government contracting sector. So I'm happy to, especially if somebody wants to reach out offline and talk about how you can find a staffing partner and what's a good way to select them for this specific thing. But there are absolutely staffing and recruiting firms out there that have a specialty in this area that do hire veterans and have a lot of experience engaging and hiring veterans. So what does that mean? And going back to what Lisa was talking about a few moments ago, it's about a network and accessing your network. So there are several ways to also be proactive in bringing veterans on your staff. And I'll slowly transition over to Lisa. I think one of the things that we talk or that we hear about a lot as a myth or as a stigma around veteran hiring is around PTSD. And I should say, in government contracting, we don't run into that too much. We don't run into companies that are concerned about hiring veterans. A lot of government contractors are veterans, and so most of them are looking to hire veterans. And if you're in that area and you're not, you're really behind. So we don't run into it too much, but we know the stigma exists because we've all gone through a lot of training around veteran hiring and been around a lot of veterans and understand from hearing their stories that PTSD is certainly one of the ones that we hear quite often.
Thanks, Ryan. Lisa, did you want to talk about that now, or did you?
I can. So, I mean, he's right. Veterans come with the same kind of like quote baggage that other humans come with. I mean, it does happen to be that we've been in combat zones. Women in the military have been in the minority of under 20% in every one of the major services. Things happen. Life happens. Many people do come out of the military with either combat trauma or other trauma. It is manageable. There are resources. I'm an example of this. And I think that one of the myths that I hear often looking at military veterans, it's that like the non-transferable skills, it's true, but also that we're robots, that I'm going to come in and I'm going to rely on my rank. I'm going to boss people around. I'm going to flip things upside down and like do all the things that people see in the movies. And I hope that by looking at me and listening to me today, that we can help dispel some of those rumors for all of you on the call. And then for people that you talk to in the future, that like, I'm the face of a PTSD veteran. I've been working in professional services for 8 years. I've been successful. I've been promoted. I've led teams. Like, it's been okay. I think my companies would tell you that it was worth hiring me. I'm a significantly disabled veteran. You can't always tell. Some days you can. And I'm not going to come into any company and boss people around. Maybe in the beginning, that was a little of a transition for me. I will be the first to admit, because when we're wearing a uniform, I had teams of 400 people that I was leading in my early 20s. It's just a weird experience compared to what we put young people up, what we put people through in kind of civilian culture. But we can do it, and we can do it successfully. And like we've said in many of these comments, and once it works, and once your company is a good fit, you're going to get all of my friends and all of their friends, and people are going to talk about that industry as being a good fit. And you're going to see the next wave of like the tech sector has seen tons of veterans come in because veterans have been successful there and they bring their friends. And so I'd love to see that happen with small businesses, especially around where I live. I think that's really special.
And I think just to tag on that, Lisa, I think the tech sector has been effective at translating requirements
for sure.
better than some of the other industries, and that's why they've had a lot of success.
For sure.
And then also just with the PTSD, I think just taking a step back, and what Lisa and I were talking about a couple of days ago here in preparation for this is for employers to keep in mind that PTSD is not exclusive to veterans. There are people that have PTSD that are not veterans, and that not all veterans and not all combat veterans have PTSD.
Yeah.
And then I think the most important one here is Lisa being an example of this, that PTSD should not ever be something that prevents you from hiring or considering to hire a veteran. It shouldn't be a factor in your decision making. And in a lot of cases, if not in most cases, it's probably something that as an employer, you're not going to be made aware of to begin with. So it's important for you as an employer to understand that that's not an assumption you should make about a veteran. And you certainly shouldn't make the assumption that if the person does in fact have PTSD, that it's going to have any sort of impact on their performance at work. And there are some instances, of course, where some accommodations might be necessary. And I think those are readily available to you, and the direction and ways to go about that with a lot of the organizations that that we all work with, these veteran support organizations.
Jen, I see your comment in the chat, and one of the industries, I think that Krista is going to send it in the meeting notes after this. So one of the other places that's been incredibly successful in making the transition is in banking, and specifically at Capital One. They have done an unbelievable job, and I think that it's a great benchmark that anyone on this call could go onto that website and honestly use the research that that company has done. They've listed out, and you'll see it, it's like 4 and 5 digit codes. It's called military specialties. Sometimes they're called MOSs in the Army. For us in the Air Force, they're called AFSCs. That doesn't matter to you, but what happens is there's like a skill code, not unlike the way that you probably skill code some of your jobs. And then there's a translation on the Capital One page of what roles on their team, yeah, that's it, specifically translate to that military skill code. And so they've done the hard work. Don't redo that. Take one of those existing resources, look at it, see what matches the roles that you're looking to fill, and start from there. I think that that's another thing that veterans will bring, is that because we've reinvented things so many times in the military, a lot of us just get tired of it. And so do a good job looking out and being like, hey, Capital One did this great thing. You guys should look, because it's super helpful and you don't need to spend the time. It's there and it's awesome.
Thanks, Lisa. That's great. And thank you for sharing your personal information as well. I appreciate that. So piggybacking on that, so where else can companies go to get training if they need training on hiring veterans? Are there places that employers can go to sort of to learn about that? Yeah,
so I share. So the company, or the program that I mentioned, is called Virginia Values Veterans. So of course, specific to the state of Virginia, nearly all states have some sort of a program to support veteran hiring. But Virginia's just happens to be a fantastic program. And I will actually share the link to the website in the chat. So I've been directly involved with Virginia Values Veterans for about 10 years. And we've been with Ride Technologies, we immediately enrolled in the program in 2018 at our, in 2019, just as the company kicked off. So this organization will you'll go through a day-long training session with them on how and best practices for hiring veterans. And then in addition to that, this organization will funnel veteran candidates to you. So you can work directly with them and their various platforms, resume databases, and the transitional connections that they have directly with the military to help show you candidates and put you in a better place, and to be a more attractive destination for a veteran transitioning. So I highly recommend Virginia Values Veterans, but there are other organizations as well in Virginia and outside that are fantastic, that support the practice and can help guide you for sure.
Appreciate that.
The ones that we hear about as we're making the transition are often the national organizations who do this, who do something similar. I love that there's a statewide one. That's special to me as a veteran who has chosen to live in Virginia. But one that you may have heard of because it's in lots of commercials is Hiring Our Heroes, which is one of the efforts for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It does the same thing of there's a pipeline that they build, and you as employers can tap into that, look at skills. And this is not just for veterans, this is also for service members' families, who in many cases are moving all over the country and around the world every 2 and 3 years, which makes it really hard in some cases to hold a traditional job. And so this is a great place for that. A newer one that didn't exist when I got out 10 years ago is called the DoD Skill Bridge program. And this is similar to what Irene has mentioned a couple of times, that this is a fully funded internship, which means that those military service members are still being paid their military salary, but instead of working for the military for 4 to 6 months, They are interning for free at your company where they are building skills that are then transferable, and you are being able to kind of test out that new labor force. So there's an application process for transitioning service members and for companies, but I see Jen shared that here. We're sending those links after as well. And then if you're looking for platform specific, if you are working in the tech space, one of the most built out organizations for that is the Veterans Force, which is run by Salesforce. So they do all of the training up front and build a pipeline. So if you are looking for people with Salesforce certifications and that's part of your business plan, that's a great pipeline. And there are lots of those, like we've mentioned a couple of times in the tech space, where there are companies that are helping veterans get those IT certifications.
Thank you. Irene, anything specific from Jersey DVR that you can share?
Yes, here in New Jersey, we connect, we have a lot of business outreach representative. We have one designated for the veterans, and they have a unit under Department of Labor. They are the ones that go out. They have many connections with employers and they assist them with putting for talent recruitment. They also do positive recruitments or virtual recruitments just for veterans. And they also educate the employer on how to put the employment and recruit veterans. They also assist with the tax incentives, and they provide all the services. And they're more bigger in a sense that they have OJT writers. They have a system set up in place where it's very easy for the employer just to go in and just put in their notes and make sure they're compliant with the with the OJT documentation. So they have a more streamlined, it's very streamlined. Ours is more antiquated, our vocational rehab more antiquated. We're more paper, everything is written in there, but then they have like an employer will get a number, they go in, they put it, and I think it's their tax ID number, they go in and then it's very easy. We're trying to catch up on that. But it's very, if you're in New Jersey and you're an employer in New Jersey, or you're an organization that offers, you might want to connect with Department of Labor, the Veterans Unit. They assist, veterans that are disabled and veterans, they're just, non-disabled veterans. That's
Thanks,
how
Irene.
DVR operates.
Thank you. So Jen, I'm sorry, Lisa, you touched on this a little bit when you said that the spouses and the family members move around a lot too. Are there services specifically for the spouses and families in addition to the veteran?
It's getting better. So again, like when I was transitioning 10 years ago, I was a military spouse and a transitioning veteran, and I could really lean into that military, like service related, combat related injury as kind of something to hang my hat on. But for family members, not that much back then. What we're seeing now is a lot more of that, especially through hiring our heroes and through some other organizations who've really realized that a lot of military spouses have like met a veteran at college or have like done other things and are eager for meaningful permanent employment. And I think that that's where my company, I work at Accenture Federal Services, so the federal arm of the Accenture consulting firm, that's where we've really leaned in a lot to realize that we have roles that are transferable across the US, and people could follow their service member really anywhere in the lower 48 states and keep their job. I think also COVID is probably changing this a bit now that we're realizing that more jobs can be remote. So we're seeing some change there, but I think that if you were to look back historically, this is definitely a population that's eager for employment, but is significantly underemployed.
And Ryan or Irene, do you do anything specifically with the family members?
Yeah, and I would just to tag on. Yeah, so the V3 program does support military spouses, and there is a separate branch of the program that focuses on military spouse hiring. I agree though with everything Lisa just mentioned, specifically that these programs are still playing catch up a little bit. These veteran organizations are fantastic, and they've really gotten to a point now where they're doing a lot of good, and they're very widespread. I think the military spouse program, once it catches up with COVID, there's a lot, especially for some of these large government integrators in the DC area, a lot they can take advantage of in utilizing military spouses with some work from home opportunities, specifically in the tech space. So I think those programs are catching up, and also something that we should, and you all as potential employers hiring should be focused on, because the family is just as important, and especially for the veteran to feel that their family's being supported. So that's also an important piece of it.
Yeah, because I would imagine the veteran isn't, you need to take a job with taking all of that into consideration as well. You know,
Exactly.
It's not just you. Okay. Thank you. And so if we switch gears a little bit to the veterans themselves, what can you say? We talked a little bit about this when we were prepping for this, but what does the veteran need to keep in mind when they're interviewing or even starting to look for positions? How do they advocate for themselves? What do they have to think about when they interview? How can they be their own best, advocate in that transition?
So I will say this again, transitioning 10 years ago, at the time I was in my early 30s, I mentioned that and I'm only saying that to say that I had about 10 years of work experience, but the work experience was taking on like monumental tasks. It was pretty ridiculous. And so I figured like, oh, I'm going to transition into a civilian job and I'm going to lead a team of like 400 people because that's what I've always done. Like that just made sense to me. That is so not how the world works, like 99% of the time. And so I think that there's some expectation management that is still that veterans are still doing kind of along the way. And many of you know this if you've changed industries, or that sometimes it's a step back to take a few steps forward, and it's okay. And I think that for me, like I got super hung up on like titles, and I wanted to be like the senior vice president of the world. And that was just like totally not appropriate for having 10 years of work experience, even when I did really big things, especially as my first role coming out of the military and having just lots of other brain transitions to have to do. And so that's something that we don't hear as we're making the transition. Again, that may be better now. I sure hope it is. But I think that that's part of the value of the SkillBridge program, where you're doing in-person internships in a corporate job. So you like learn how to wear clothes that aren't a uniform, because I will again tell you, like, that's still hard for me 10 years later of I've got to go in to run a meeting tomorrow. Normally I like still in my brain, put on a uniform, go. And now it's like, well, but like, what's really business casual? Like it's that kind of stuff that's really hard for us.
So you have to set your own, reset your own expectations.
There's some expectation management on my part and on a veteran's part for sure, of like which skills are actually, especially those like leadership and like team building, like that kind of thing. I'm not going to see another, like the last role I had in the military, I was the deputy of a 600-person organization. That's going to take 20 more years to happen in the quote real world. And that's totally okay. But there's some of that of like, it's okay. It's going to look different, but fulfilling can look the same. It can still be fulfilling.
And Ryan had mentioned how even just a line in the job description can make a difference. So what about a resume for a veteran? Like, what is it? Do they need to keep things in mind when they're working on their resume in terms of how they state your experience, how you state your skills? I mean, are there places that you need to make sure you say things a specific way so that people understand what you can bring to the table?
So yes, and Lisa and Irene can probably speak a little bit more to this, but there is so much help out there for veterans through these organizations in terms of helping them translate their resumes, which is definitely step one. But I would recommend to any veteran in the transition process to definitely reach out to any of these organizations for support in that specific area, because that's something that I think there's a lot of attention has come to that we as an industry in government contracting, we've had to make a lot of changes as well and are continuing to do that. But I think that's something that that we're becoming more and more aware of for sure. So I would recommend to a veteran to reach out for help on that, because without the mapping, we wouldn't have a clue either. Like when I'm looking at a veteran's resume, a lot of the times, if it hasn't been translated yet, if it's a military resume for another military job, I mean, I don't have a clue. I would definitely need Lisa to walk me through it. So I think the mapping is absolutely necessary for all of us. And so as the industry is getting smart, because we want these veterans on our team, I think the help for the veterans is also there for them they just need to reach out and look for it. And I think we just need to be prepared on our side of things as well. So I think in the industry side, it's certainly us understanding what some of those transition and mapping look like.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to add.
Go ahead, Irene.
To Ryan's. I would suggest to the veterans to have two types of resumes. The first one would be federal resume. A federal resume helps them because they have federal experience. They work for the government. They probably have a GS level of 4 or 5 or up because they were in the military. So that's federal. And then another thing that really helps them on their federal resume is that security clearance. Many federal agencies require that security clearance to even work in there if they already have it because they were in the military. That's a plus. And there's different levels of security clearance. So that would be my first recommendation, because of course the federal government tends to hire more veterans. So does the state. The other resume, more simple, because the federal resume is very long, but the more simple corporate resume would also help with getting jobs with the federal contractors. It has to be as elaborate, but we do business with the federal contractors, and they tend to hire also a lot of veterans, and they want it more simple as contract to that. So that's my tidbit.
Yeah, Irene, I'm glad that you included that. So I think the one thing I'll tag on that is I would also recommend to any veteran to consider and look into government contracting. So in the DC metropolitan area alone, you're talking about in Virginia, about 700,000 veterans, in DC, about 30,000, in Maryland, just under 400,000. So you're talking right in the neighborhood of 1.1 million veterans in the area, all with security clearances, and several million jobs directly with the federal government that require some sort of government issued clearance. So there are tons of opportunities for veterans in DC and all over the United States in federal government contracting. So I think that's one of the things I'll mention, is that if they're not considering that I would absolutely send them in that direction, because there is definitely an opportunity for them with the federal government somewhere as a contractor.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm just checking our time. So can each of you talk a little bit about a success story, either a successful employer that you place veterans in that is on your side as a partner, or a specific veteran story, just something that where we can see that how this really works in the real world.
I have an amazing story that happened in the past year. So I told you guys that I was deployed to Afghanistan. I was in Kabul at the second half of 2011. And then what happened in Kabul in the past about year. So we had 11 interpreters on our team. We got all of them out of there well before last year happened. And one of them, the lead interpreter for our team, has chosen to work in IT. So about a year ago, I met with him, helped him put together a resume, and helped him get hired at Accenture with me. Got him a $30,000 raise, a permanent job in a Fortune 500 company. And he is like that's the level of connection that we have, not just among each other, but also with people who touched our journeys along the way. And so this is a super special story to me. He lives 20 minutes down the road. Our families get together for traditional Afghan tea. Like, that's the community that I hope that all of you will tap into, because those are the kind of people that are important in my life. And I think that they're really going to add value to your companies.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, I'll just share a story of a client. She's a small business, started out with just her as a solo government contractor. She did the Virginia Values Veterans Training Program with me, actually, with Ride Technologies, and 3 years later, she has a staff made up of, I believe she has 11 contractors on now, and they are all but one are a veteran of the United States military. So she has, in 3 years, through her, and very much she credits the Virginia Values Veterans Program. She was able to grow her company to 11 people, and all on the back of United States military veterans. So she's been a huge success story, and that's when she comes to us, and so we're her staffing partner. When she comes to us, we know that there's a big preference for veterans with her organization, and that's where she's had success. I'll just take a moment to add that I think another thing that's particularly appealing about veterans in this market right now is in dealing with retention. It's one of the biggest challenges from a recruiting and staffing standpoint, and for hiring managers out there, is finding employees that are interested in looking for a long-term opportunity and interested in being with an organization for the long term. And when you look at, in our experience, we see that veterans are looking for this much more so than anyone else in the marketplace right now. But the statistics also show that it's about 7 to 10%. More often that a veteran is going to stay twice as long as a civilian employee. So if you think about that, 10% of the time someone's going to stay twice as long on your staff. It to me is a really big plus factor in hiring a veteran. And like we talked about some numbers earlier, so we certainly don't want to generalize about a group of, just in the DC area, 1 million people, but I think that there are some really big advantages to hiring veterans. So anyway, sorry.
Thank you. No.
I would say, in the broad sense, the most successful thing that we've done so far, it was the Schedule A targeted hiring events, because we would get lots of veterans during each event that we did. They brought their service connected documentation, their resume. They were already scheduled ahead of time for an interview at the location. That HR person would already have been reviewed, and then they would get an interview at the day of the event. That would allow them to, move on to the second interview. As a result, we developed really close, business relationship with the U.S. Mint, with GSA, with logistics, Social Security Administration. They would reach out to us every time they had a position so that we can start doing a positive recruitment for them, because we would get so many hires. We did follow the statistics, and per every schedule, we would get like 100 people to attend, and at each 10 people, one person would get hired with the federal government. For us, that was good, because DVR is not that big, but as far as caseloads are concerned, the people that have that that education, many of them were vets, because they would have that bachelor degree, they would have that master's, they would be highly educated. Or our clientele, we do have some, but not as much. So we would definitely, like I said, we develop great relationships that we continue to bring them on, like IRS, but they're more entry level. And all these positions that we continue to develop, like we wanted more entry level, and we were able to develop that. Like US Mint, only they hire just people with experience in warehouse. So it was really a really good experience, and I think it was very successful, and that's why we continue to do that for sure.
How many times a year do you have those hiring events, Irene?
We're having it once a year. But some counties are, like in New Jersey, we have 18 offices. So we try to do one in the south and one in the north.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Chris, let me just want to tag on something that Irene was talking about with transitioning kind of entry level. So we talked earlier about what are some advantages for an employer in hiring veterans. And I think Lisa and Irene both covered this, at least for the most part. But I think one of the biggest things that we see on the entry level side and in some of the, when we're hiring people kind of earlier on in their career, if you're hiring a veteran into one of these roles, things like showing up on time to work, general competency, following instructions, listening. These are all things that when you're hiring a veteran, you're really not concerned about. Those are things that are really strong suits nearly across the board for veteran hiring. And if you talk to any hiring manager who manages entry-level roles on a regular basis, this is what you're looking for. Those are 3 or 4 of the most important things on the list. And most of the rest of the things can be taught, can be trained on. So that's one thing that we see in terms of an advantage with hiring at kind of the earlier stages of an employee's career. And then for the more senior positions, what we see across the board is a lot of really strong leadership skills with these transitioning veterans that are coming out after 10, 15, 20 years. And again, another thing, if you're talking to hiring managers that are hiring for senior leadership roles, that's the #1 thing that they're looking for is strong leadership skills. And so I think those 2 are that we see as being very inviting and something that for hiring managers to keep in mind as they're considering veterans and as they're targeting their searches, that those are some of the really big benefits that come from choosing and hiring veterans.
That's great. Thank you, Ryan. Lisa, there was something in the chat about graduate programs or additional training. I don't know if you wanted to just say a little bit about that, just in case someone's not following the chat, sure. But
I think, no, it's an excellent question. And I think that, again, really playing into what Ryan just said, veterans come with a lot of leadership skills. That's the kind of training that the military focuses on primarily. There's some skills-based training, but a lot of it is leadership training, especially for those who are transitioning as officers. And so we have this propensity to like, oh, I'm going to go get more training. And Jen watched me do this when I made my own transition of like, oh, I'm going to go get an MBA. It was valuable. Could I have spent that time differently? Yeah, probably, because right when we make that transition, like we've talked about many times over this conversation, there's a lot of moving pieces of like, am I going to like this industry? Am I going to like this kind of role? Is this the right fit for me? And you'll see veterans, although we will stick it out exactly like Ryan said, much longer than our civilian counterparts, you will see us make a couple of moves in those first few years. And that's very natural. And so it probably makes more sense to kind of back pocket some of that training for once we land in an industry, in a role type that really resonates with us the same way that our previous military career did.
So they shouldn't feel like they need to hurry up and do this ahead of time. In time, they'll.
I mean, there are some, and I think Ryan will say this too, that if you are really looking to like make a transition into federal consulting, there's a lot of value in like a project management professional certification. We're seeing tons of veterans do that. There are lots of programs that help veterans prepare for that and do that for free. I think that and technical certifications are probably the 2 places that make a lot of sense in terms of like degree programs. If you have a 4-year degree, I think that's a good starting point, and perhaps consider waiting on advanced degrees or additional advanced degrees until you've really settled on an industry to make sure that you're getting the return on that investment of time and resources.
Makes sense. Thank you. So now that we're near the end, are there questions that we did not address? If anybody has anything they want to either raise their hand or add to the chat. Otherwise, we will also put up a slide with some of the information that we talked about throughout. So this is our contact information if you have any questions directly for any of us or all of us. And we also have a slide with some of the programs we talked about, SkillBridge and trying to think what else. Virginia Values Veterans, we have that information, Hiring Our Heroes, the Salesforce training, Jersey DVR, any of those things that we talked about that were not in chat are also on this slide. And if you have questions